How much do you know about Mississippi? Would you believe that it is a place where cryptids thrive? Let's set aside all preconceived notions and search the woods of Mississippi together. Welcome back to Mississippi Monsters. Today we got a little bit of something different, something kind of out of the ordinary that I've been doing. But it's actually going to be one of the cryptids that I addressed in the Who episode, where we talked about all the different cryptids that we have here in the state of Mississippi. But this, on the other hand, is actually one story that I think is very, very creepy. So what we're going to be doing is going to be talking about this one story, and of course you've already looked at the title. We're going to be talking about the Pascagoula River Aliens. And I'm telling you, the more I dove into this, the stranger it got. And it was just crazy. But anyway, before we get to that, I would like to just go ahead and do some housekeeping. And just state, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. I really am trying to push this channel to new heights. And I'm trying to just make it worth my while, you know. And still trying to hit that 100 mark by the end of September. We're still trying to push and get that done. And also, I'm on pace of steadily hitting that weekly podcast mark. Now, this is probably going to come out less than a week of my last upload. So maybe that's a sign of good things to come, right? And please, I also like to add this. If you have any stories, or if you have anything that you would like to add, or just something to educate me on, please contact me at MississippiMonsters601@gmail.com. That's MississippiMonsters601@gmail.com. You will also be able to see that email address throughout the episode. It will come up randomly. So please feel free to do that. But let's get into the story. So, the win. October 11th, 1973. This happened right after work, supposedly around 6 p.m., and it was just getting dark. And this happened in Pascagoula, Mississippi. Pascagoula River runs through that city, but if you look at different charts, it can also be named the Singing River. So Pascagoula River, Singing River, they're pretty much synonymous with one another. There's also hospitals down there called the Singing River Hospitals because they lay along that river. And the Singing River gets its name from a very different paranormal activity, but we'll get into that story later on in another episode. But this happened right there along the river on an old shipyard pier on the west bank of the Pascagoula River. And the two parties that we're going to be talking about is Charles Hitchin and Calvin Parker. Now, Hitchin is 42 at the time, and Parker was 19 at the time of when this happened. And they was just, like I said, they were fishing on the pier. And what happened was a possible UFO sighting and then an abduction. So let's describe the UFO before we do the story. They say that the UFO was anywhere between 30 to 40 foot across, but Parker later changed that, and he thought it was more like 80 foot across. So it was a very large craft that I don't think you could have missed something that big. But they stated that it was anywhere between 8 to 10 feet high. That is from the bottom of the craft to the top of the craft. And the whole entire time they saw it, it only hovered about 2 foot above the ground. Now, both witnesses described this craft of having some whirling and whizzing sound coming from it. And kind of eerie, right? And also there was 2 flashing lights emitted from it, which is it holds a special part of the story whenever the witnesses started talking about that. But later Parker described this as a football-shaped craft. So I guess it's more like a football shape in that there's more points at the end instead of an egg. But he stated that it looked like a football. So creatures are involved, so let's talk about the creatures. It is stated that there were three creatures that was witnessed, and they was around 1.5 meters, which is about 4.5 feet tall. Whenever I first started doing this, I honestly thought these creatures were massive. I thought they were supposed to be huge. But 4.5 feet tall, that's basically like a child, a teenager. And I honestly thought they were supposed to be bigger than that. But I was surprised whenever I found out that fact. Now, these creatures also have some pale gray skin. They don't have eyes that were visible. Their hands are shaped like either mittens or crab pinchers. So it looked like they had claws. They also had like robotic-like slits for mouths, and they didn't move. They didn't communicate with the mouth, supposedly. Two discernible legs that looked like they were actually fused together. Now, whenever they talked about how they moved, it was kind of like kind of like a hopping, but it said, all the description I found in multiple different sources said it was like a unipedal. So, not bipedal, but unipedal. So, let your mind go with that. But I thought that was kind of odd. But also, one of the most characteristic things that they noticed about these creatures is they had conical shapes protruding out where their ears and where their nose is. So they had three conical shapes. In any depictions that I've actually looked at, and I actually drew myself, these conical shapes actually look like thorns coming out, or horns coming out of their face, and they're coming out horizontally and not vertically. So it's like straight out, and which was really, really weird. And this is how they described it. So no eyes, no ears, no nose that could be seen, but the only thing that was on the face and head was actually a slit for a mouth and like three horns coming out of their face horizontally. So that was really, really weird to me. So let's go ahead and continue on. So the two witnesses, or one witness, Parker, described these creatures of actually being masculine and feminine. Two of the creatures was masculine, he stated, because of how they carry themselves, I'm assuming. But the third creature, he said, was more feminine. Now, how it's easily more to be able to discern which one was which, according to Parker, is that these masculine creatures, their heads actually sat on top of their shoulders. There was no visible neck. But however, the feminine creature, her head sat on a neck connected to the shoulders. So the feminine creature actually looked a little bit more human as opposed to the masculine. And this creature, the feminine creature, is actually the one that Parker claimed communicated with him telepathically. The other two creatures, they didn't communicate at all with the two witnesses. So that's their story. But let's go ahead and get into the abduction story and hear what Hickson and Parker. Man, I'm going to butcher Hickson's name. It doesn't roll off the tongue like Parker. But anyway, let's go ahead and see what these two witnesses had to say. Hitchens and Parker left work together and went to an old shipyard to fish on the Pascagoula River. They noticed blue lights flashing across the water, and they thought it was the cops coming to run them off the premises. Now that right there, I told you about the lights, was going to play into the story. Just imagine sneaking onto a property or going to a property you're not sure you're supposed to be on, and all of a sudden you see blue lights hitting off the water, and immediately you just think it's the cops. I mean, I've been there. I understand. So I thought that actually played very well into the story. So when they noticed the blue lights flashing across the water, they thought it was cops coming to run them off the premises. That is when they noticed a football-shaped craft approaching them and came to a sudden stop. At this time, they were stricken immobile. They weren't able to move. They said that they were conscious, but paralyzed. Three creatures approached the two fishermen and floated them into the craft. So what they were saying is that they were immobile, paralyzed, but these creatures, according to Parker, they use some type of telekinesis, and they floated them in the air. And I'm not sure if it was horizontally or they just came up off the ground vertically and floated them up. I could not find any information on that. And please, do your due diligence. Go research this yourself. It is a very fascinating story. But anyway, the three creatures basically floated them into the craft, and that's where they took them to do this. And then the event was said to last around 20 minutes. And during this time, physical exams were conducted on the two witnesses. And they didn't really go into specifics, and the sources that I was able to pick up all the information that I was able to didn't really state which physical experiments or examinations were done. So I guess this is one of those times you can let your mind run wild. But I have not been able to find any of that information. But I was not going to dig too deep because I want y'all to be able to get the book that's on about this. But it is a very fascinating story that happened here in Mississippi. But anyway, let's get on with it. Hitchens and Parker called Keesler Air Force Base to report the event, but was told to call the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. They was basically telling them that this is more of a domestic issue. And basically, honestly, from what the police office did, they honestly thought that these two men were crazy or drunk or high or something other else, and they wanted it to be somebody else's problem. So after Hitchens and Parker got to the sheriff's office, the two were subjected to a sobriety test, a voice stress test, and a polygraph. And the crazy thing is, Hitchens and Parker, they were said to have passed all three tests with flying colors. There was no discrepancies in their stories. They both lined up well, and they didn't have any issues with the cops. They submitted their stories, and the cops released them. But afterwards, two skeptics came along, and they were going to do their best to discredit the witnesses because in their minds they didn't think their story lined up. One skeptic was named Philip Glass, and he stated that Hitchens refused to take a polygraph for him, so Glass immediately rejected Hitchens' account. And this is what happens. A witness states that something happened. They stated something happened. And now the interviewer, thinking that they are owed the truth, or that they are owed something special, when they try to demand something of the witness, and when the witness does not agree to it, oftentimes what happens is the investigator or reporter automatically deems them a liar. All because the witness will not subject themselves to what the investigator or reporter wants to say. And this is done a lot in the cryptid society, in the cryptid world. Somebody comes along and says that they see something, and they can't recount something exactly so, or how the reporter wants it recounted, and all of a sudden they just write them off immediately. And I've heard several accounts of Bigfoot encounters where there were some more supernatural or paranormal things that happened that was beyond the physical or natural world. And what do some of these Bigfoot investigators do? They write them off because it's outside of their perspective of the world. And it's crazy. But at the same time, as I just told y'all, Hitchens and Parker both received a polygraph at the police department. So Glass thinks he was somebody special, and I guess he wanted to get that polygraph done in front of him for his own, either his own amusement or for his own, I don't know. I don't understand why he couldn't have took it that way, but that's oftentimes what happens. And according to my sources, that is how it kind of lined up. But another skeptic name was Joe Nickel. Joe Nickel, he believed that Hitchens dreamed the whole thing. In an interview that Hitchens gave to a TV show, Hitchens said that he at first had passed out and didn't experience anything, and he woke up after the abduction took place. Well, Joe Nickel ran with this, and he honestly believed that he came up with the whole thing, convinced Parker to go along with it so they can become famous, and that's what Nickel believed would happen. And I mean, Hitchens actually admitted that he passed out, but later recanted. Parker even stated that he himself passed out, but then he said he didn't. Honestly, this is my opinion. The more I have read about the story, it seems like Parker was trying to distance himself from this encounter. Parker, even in a later interview that I've read, he said that when he went to a funeral, he wrote his name down in a registry, and people started noticing his name, and Parker stated that instead of trying to take away from the family and the deceased, that he left. So Parker was actually didn't seem like somebody that was really trying to get a lot of recognition out of this. So oftentimes a lot of witnesses, what happens is their names get synonymous with an event, and they don't want that happening, and they try to distance themselves from it. But the thing is, it's hard to have a professional life outside of the paranormal or cryptozoology if you have one of these encounters, because what's going to happen is you're going to pull up your name, and your name's going to be associated with that event. I mean, either you like it or you don't, and I think oftentimes that's what people see, and they refuse to make these encounters documented. They refuse to report them. They refuse to let anybody know because they do not want their names associated with it. And the best way not to let their names be associated with it is not even telling the encounter at all. So that's my take from it. This was a very fascinating story. Like I said, I'm just going to do an abbreviated story. If you want the full information, the full details that was given, there's a book on it. I'm not going to try to advertise. I'm not going to try to push anything. I'm not sponsored in any other way. But this is just a story that happened in my neck of the woods. And when I say that, I've got family that lives in Pascagoula, or used to. I've got family that lives in Gaucher and Moss Point and now Ocean Springs. So it's right there in that area where I know very well. I grew up going down there. I know the Pascagoula, and I know the spot where they claimed this has happened. My family's down there, and I have a very personal connection with this area. And it's just one of those fascinating stories that people just don't talk about that much or are afraid to because it's outside of the normal. And I'm going to keep hitting on these areas, these subjects, because I know it's not comfortable talking about it. It's not comfortable accepting it. But the thing is, either we believe people's encounters or we don't. And at the end of the day, that's what all that matters, right? I mean, that's what it boils down to. Nobody's got to convince me that this happened. Nobody's convinced me that it didn't happen. This is an account that has been well documented and has been televised, has been publicized, has been put into production for different or published in different books. So Pascagoula gets recognition for it. But anyway, that's pretty much going to wrap up tonight's episode, and I appreciate y'all sticking around, and I appreciate y'all listening to these episodes. I am having an amazing time reporting or researching on this and doing this podcast. I feel like I'm really coming into myself, being able to do this, and I think I've come a long way since that first episode where I introduced myself and introduced the channel. But I am having an amazing time doing this. So with that being said, just remember, there are boogers in those woods. Good night.